food security challenges and policy responses. In fact, I noticed that this is actually a discussion among friends of colleagues, past and present. So, in fact, I hated to break up the conversations, informal conversations. You are already ongoing. So let us continue that conversation in a bit of formal manner. Also, that we have a very dear colleague, David. He is online from Boston. So, as you know, that this is important. The rice is important commodity, be it as economic sense, political sense, social sense, cultural sense. So it's a very important for us in Asia. And the rice market has been also going through the kind of changes. We know the historical episode in 2008. We know the recent adjustments, and of course, the countries in the region, especially in ASEAN +3 and format, have been working together to address how to respond. Not just exposed, but respond in a way that prevent the kind of turbulences that is not healthy for the whole economy, a whole region. So for this first part of the session, and we'll have opportunity to have an overview of the regional rice market, and we have a very distinguished panel to join us for to share their insights, their views, how this regional collective effort can be further advanced. And the second part of the session will discuss a very long-standing initiative for more than 10 years now, and we will have that discussion. But let's have the first discussion. We have a very distinguished panel, as I said. We will first have David Dow, who is to give us a lead overview, highlighting the changes in the regional rice market and globally speaking as well, and some of the important policy developments, new opportunities. Then we'll have 4 seasoned panel members to join us for a discussion. We'll have Dr. Bruce Tarantino, and we'll have Dr. Ashok Gulati, and former Minister Chai, Minister Fa, and he is the chair of the IRI board, and we'll have, and then Professor Ora from Thailand. So before I call on the panel members to come on stage, let us invite David to give us an overview presentation. So David, may I have you on board? Thank you for joining us in the late evening from North America.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shanbin, and good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, the distinguished panelists and the audience, and I look forward to an interesting conversation today. Let me share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see it? So, okay. So to start off with, I'd just like to give a little bit of historical context to the world rice economy. Global rice production has more than tripled from 1961 until today, outpacing population growth by a fair amount. Global rice trade has grown even more rapidly, with nearly doubling from 1961 to 1990, and then growing by a factor of 5 from 1990 to today. So altogether, almost a factor of 10 during that time. Now, will the rapid growth continue in the future? The answer is definitely no. Population growth in rice-producing Asia has been steadily declining. It's now down to about 0.5% per year. By 2052, the population in this part of the world is projected to reach its peak of about 4.8 billion, up from 4.4 billion now, and after that it will start to decline. In addition, rice consumption per person has declined in many countries, in Japan and Korea, in Malaysia and Thailand, and if that starts to take hold in other parts of the region, the world rice economy will really be demand constrained, especially since this part of Asia accounts for 84% of global consumption. Now, on the other hand, while population growth in Asia is slowing, it's also slowing in sub-Saharan Africa, but it's much more rapid in sub-Saharan Africa. And the rapid population growth in sub-Saharan Africa is a potential market for rice exports from Asia going forward. It currently accounts for about 1/3 of global imports. On the other hand, rice demand from sub-Saharan Africa will also depend on its economic growth. And that economic growth has been erratic over the past several decades, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. So it's going to be quite difficult to forecast African consumption demand going into the future. Another important thing to note about that market, is it depends, of course, on how much sub-Saharan Africa will invest in its own rice production. That will also affect the potential for exports from Asia, but it's also important to note that most rice production in sub-Saharan Africa is rain-fed, which makes it kind of prone to lower yields and also more subject to the influences of the weather. Now, the world rice market makes a very important contribution to food security around the world by moving supplies from surplus regions to deficit regions. Who are the players in this market? Well, the top 6 net exporters. When I refer to net exports, I mean exports minus imports. So the top 6, the top 6 net exporters are all from Asia, with 4 of them being from ASEAN. One key question for the future of the world rice market, this chart up here shows average exports from 2018 to 2020, and then 2021 to 2023. And you can see the big change in India during that time. And this has been one of the big features, one of the big developments in the world rice market in the last few years. And that will be an important question going forward, whether India can maintain the supplies that we saw from 2021 to 2023, or maybe even exceed that. Of course, India has imposed export restrictions, not a ban, but export restrictions earlier this year, but hopefully that will not affect the future growth of the world rice market. Now, this shows import market shares by region. I show imports by region here because imports are much less concentrated. The concentration ratio for exports, the top 5 countries account for almost 80% of exports, but the top 5 importers account for less than 30% of imports. So it makes more sense to show it here by region. You can see that sub-Saharan Africa is the leading importer, the orange slice of the pie, about 1/3 of total global imports, but they're widely spread among different countries around the world, and many different countries in the world import rice. As many of you are aware, there's been some instability in the world rice market over the past year or so. World rice prices for the first half of 2023 were relatively stable until India imposed some export restrictions on non-basmati, non-parboiled rice in late July, after which prices immediately went up about 10% in just 2 weeks. Now, some people refer to this as a ban. I prefer not to use that phrase, as the government of India has allowed exports for food security purposes. And because of this exception, the increase in world prices so far has has not been as large as it could have been were it truly a ban. It's also important to put the recent events in some historical perspective. This graph shows the price of Thai 5% brokens deflated by the US Consumer Price Index since 1960. And if you look to the far right of the diagram, you see that even with the current increase in prices, it's still way below the levels of the 1960s and 70s and well below the level reached at the peak of the 2008 world food crisis. Now let's go from the world rice economy to some brief discussion of national policies. Broadly speaking, every country has different policies, so it's hard to summarize them all in a brief session like this. But broadly speaking, exporting countries tend to try and protect farmers from temporarily low prices, whether they be due to seasonal price movements or interannual price changes. They can't do that on a permanent basis. It's too difficult. It would make the exporting country uncompetitive in the world market. Thailand did try to do this back around 2011 by raising prices very, very high, but all it did was end up costing them market share to India. So that doesn't work for exporters. India, among the three major exporters here, India is the most interventionist with heavy procurement, while Thailand and Vietnam try to protect their own farmers from temporary declines without substantial domestic procurement. Now, if we look at importing countries like Indonesia and the Philippines, they have different policies than exporters. Both of these two countries have very high levels of market price support, which means they use trade policies to restrict imports and thereby keep domestic prices more or less permanently higher than they would be under free trade. So these trade policies promote self-sufficiency, but achieving self-sufficiency through trade restrictions as opposed to increased productivity has consequences. And one of the consequences is that retail rice prices are higher in importing countries due to those import restrictions. In 2022 and 2023, Philippine prices were about 50% above the average level of prices in Thailand and Vietnam. And in Indonesia, prices were almost double. This is true. These data are up there for the last couple of years, but that same pattern has existed for more or less the past 6 or 7 decades, if not longer. Now, because rice is such an important part of the diet in Southeast Asia, a high price for rice makes it difficult for people to afford a healthy diet. And this chart up here shows the percentage of the population that's unable to afford a healthy diet. And you can see it's above 70% in both Philippines and Indonesia. It's more like about 20% in Thailand and Vietnam. And if many people are unable to afford healthy diets, it should be no surprise that a relatively high percentage of children will be stunted in their growth, which at the population level is associated with reduced cognitive development and reduced earnings potential in adult life. The desire for self-sufficiency on the part of the importers to some extent arises from fears over overexposure to the world rice market, which is perceived as unstable. One characteristic of the world rice market is that it's important to mention is the fact that the ratio of international trade to global production is much lower for rice, which is the blue line up there, than it is for wheat and maize. In other words, the world rice market is considered to be a thin market. This is often cited as a reason for why the world rice market should not be relied on for supplies. But it's important to note that the world rice market has become much thicker over the years, especially since 1990, when it was just the ratio of exports to global production was about 4%. It's now over 10%, so it's more than doubled. And thicker markets should contribute to more stable prices. Now, while the world rice market is thinner than other markets, there are other characteristics that make the world rice market different than world wheat and maize markets and contribute to more stable prices than the other two cereals. First, rice has fewer demand-side linkages with other cereals. Other cereals in other parts of the economy. For example, maize is linked to energy markets, which are very volatile and very large, and wheat is linked to maize markets much more than rice is, because a great percentage of wheat is used for animal feed, which is the primary use for maize. So these reduced linkages between rice and energy markets and between rice and other cereal markets means there's less possibility of shocks in one part of the global economy spilling into rice than for wheat and maize. There's also fewer linkages on the supply side. Rice is a little bit more isolated from those markets on the supply side because it's grown under submerged conditions, unlike other cereals. Most important, rice production is more stable than wheat and maize production by far due to a much wider prevalence of irrigation. You can see up here the volatility, the annual volatility of rice production is much, much lower than that for wheat and maize. About more than 60% of total global production is irrigated for rice, or global area, I should say, compared to about 30% for wheat and 20% for maize. So what's the net result of all these differences between rice, wheat, and maize markets? Well, this chart shows that despite the world rice market being thinner than wheat and maize markets, ultimately rice prices are more stable or less volatile. The chart up here shows volatility. Now, this has not always been true. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the world rice market was much more unstable, more volatile. But since the turn of the century, rice prices have been more stable, and that's a fact not appreciated by very many people. But now, of course, the world rice market still has episodes of production shortfall and instability. One main cause of such episodes are El Nino events, which can lead to also to export restrictions in some cases. And in fact, El Nino has been one factor of the current rice market. Numbers greater than 0 in this graph indicate positive sea surface temperature anomalies, and those indicate El Nino conditions. So since about April of last year, we've been in an El Nino condition, but that El Nino condition peaked in November, and it's been declining since then. This graph goes up to February. It declined more in March. So now there will still be some lingering effects of El Nino later in the year, but El Nino is definitely on the way out. According to the most recent production projections from the USDA, production in ASEAN in 2023-2024 is forecast to decline by about 1.3% because it's particularly vulnerable to El Nino, which causes drought in this part of the world. But global production, on the other hand, is supposed to increase slightly. Now, we'll probably have a La Nina later this year, but La Nina is much less of a problem for rice production in Southeast Asia because it tends to lead to more rainfall, which tends to increase the area that farmers plant to rice. Now, El Nino events usually lead to higher prices on the world rice market. There's been about 9 strong El Nino events since 1960, and world rice prices have increased during these events by more than 10% over a span of a few months, 7 times, 7 out of 9 times. And 5 out of 9 times, the increase has been more than 25%. We do not see such a tendency with strong La Nina events. Now, a key feature of strong El Nino events are that they're highly predictable by Nino 3.4 sea surface temperature anomaly July measurements. Since 1960, a strong Nino 3.4 SSTA reading in July led to a strong ENSO event later that year, 16 out of 17 times. 9 out of 10 strong positive readings led to a strong El Nino event. 7 out of 7 strong negative readings led to a strong La Nina event. And if the reading, the 3.4 SSTA reading in July is weak, that's happened 47 times. 45 of those 47 times, we've had the subsequent El Nino or La Nina has also been weak. So the bottom line of this slide is that strong El Nino events are highly predictable. Several months before they start to have an adverse impact on production, or even start to lead to short-term volatility on the world rice market. So anticipating these El Nino events can help provide even more stability to the world rice market and make it easier for importing countries to use it for improving food security. So to finish off my presentation, I'd just like to pose some concluding questions. How these questions are answered in actual practice will have a big impact on the future of the world rice economy and how well it can contribute to global food security. One question, will rice research, development, and extension be able to neutralize the adverse impacts of El Nino in particular and climate change more broadly? Second, will Asian countries encourage crop diversification to address emerging consumer demands for foods other than rice that are essential components of a healthy diet? For example, fish, meat, fruits, and vegetables. Will India continue to make major or even bigger contributions to supplies on the world rice market? How can we create international mechanisms that reduce the frequency and impact of export restrictions, which are an important source of price instability on the world rice market? Given the predictability of El Nino events, how can we create early warning systems that minimize the impact of such events on rice consumers and farmers? What role can digital technology play in rice production, distribution, and trade, or in cash transfers to the poor in the event of adverse price shocks? And finally, should we redefine how we think of an emergency to improve preparedness against shocks? Do we consider price shocks on the world rice market as emergencies? Can we use call and put options, possibly on a government-to-government basis, to provide insurance against rising or falling world prices for importers and exporters? And how can we give greater importance and emergency response to nutrition in addition to just considerations of dietary energy? Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing from the very distinguished panelists and speakers in the rest of this session, and also look forward to the discussion that follows. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, David, Dr. Dao, for that very insightful presentation, that overviews on the broader supply-demand issues and the policy dynamics, and then give us some very thoughtful questions we'll have opportunity to discuss among the panel members and then with audience. May I now invite our four distinguished panel members joining on stage. May I invite Dr. Bruce Tondino, the Monetary Board member of BSP, the Philippines, and then Professor Ashok Gulati, a distinguished professor, Indian Council of Research, for research on international economic studies. Minister Fa, chair of IRI Board of Trustees, then Professor Oras, yes, Professor Oras from Kasesa University. Okay. For each of the panel members, and they will have an opportunity to share with us their initial thoughts. And some of them have prepared PowerPoints. They have 10 minutes, so keep the time. Then we'll keep the flow and discussions. And in your discussions, and in the first round, you may also like to address some of the questions raised by David earlier. And then we'll have second round and open up and for discussion, exchange views with the participants. So may I now invite Dr. Bruce Tarantino. Give you
Just a quick one. Thank you for this opportunity. Now, I'm sorry David is not here with us. I was looking forward to seeing an old colleague and an old friend. So, let me see, how does this work?
Do we have the PowerPoints?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I should say that I'm glad David provided us with a global view of things. It's important to remind us that the countries exist in a world, especially since we are relatively small, open countries. But all policy making about rice is local, and it responds to local forces, and the policymakers very often ignore what's going on in the rest of the world. That's why a lot of the problems that we face locally are very persistent. So, moving forward on this point where? Okay. So, the Philippine rice policies all the way back from the end of World War II, 2019, have been dominated by three aspects. First, price protection, favoring farmers, a rice trade monopoly by the National Food Authority, and the National Food Authority, next, doesn't move. Okay. Talking about buying high from farmers and selling low to consumers relative to the domestic price. So which means that even if the domestic price is pretty high by world standards, as long as it's higher than last year, they say it's good. So when that is your comparator, it doesn't really work, right? Now, the thing is, the result then is that Philippine domestic prices have always been higher than global prices. The two top lines are Philippine well-milled rice and regular milled rice. And the bottom lines are orange for Vietnam and red for Thailand. And the green line at the bottom is Philippine farm gate prices. So, not very competitive, as you can see. The result of all this, not only for rice but for agriculture in general, is that budgets, even though they've grown by quantum leaps over the years, have been focused on giveaways. They've been focused on price subsidies instead of productivity. So this is the answer of why is it that IRRI exists in the Philippines, but the Philippines doesn't use IRRI. And in effect, farmers are not competitive and consumers are effectively taxed. Next. So, hungry Filipinos. These policies have persisted. Why? First, because they're easy. They're politically easy. You don't have to worry about trying to push against the tide. You just give it away. Next. Consumers don't participate in that process. Consumers are not organized. Consumers do not figure in the policy discussions. And there's a myth that whatever government interventions have been implemented work. And that's what the politicians claim. Also, next. Then there came President Duterte. And after 50 years of this policy, he used whatever political capital that he had to pass the rice tariffication law. And it came at a time when domestic prices were much higher than international prices. Great pressure to get it done. So he passed it in March 2019. And the result of that is plain to see. Import quantitative restrictions were removed and the NFA monopoly on rice was dismantled. And tariffs on rice imports were directed to the Rice Competitiveness Enhancement Fund, RCEF. Midterm outcomes on yield are very clearly up, based on investments funded by the RCEF. Seeds, particularly, credit, mechanization, extension support, and the components working all together. Yields have been up. And each of the past 3 semesters have been record yields for rice. And it looks like this year is also going to be a record year for rice harvests. Coming from the central bank, we also see that rice's contribution to inflation has dropped. On the average, over the last 10 years or so, the contribution of rice to inflation has been in the range of 35 to 40%. Rice alone. Rice prices have become more stable relative to, say, the FAO price index. And next. But even with this gain from the policy change, there still are issues. Of course, there's Ukraine and tightness in the fertilizer market, the India ban, and El Nino, as David has pointed out. And so, in that way, the gains that have been achieved under the rice tariffication law are seen as nullified. And that brings up the policy dialogue once again. Did the RTL work or not? And it's sometimes quite difficult to separate the various influences on rice prices. Next. So, those threats continue. And there is a vocal minority in the policymaking world in the Philippines right now that's attempting to bring back the pre-reform status, to bring back NFA and to bring back quantitative restrictions on rice. In addition, even if the rice monopoly has been dismantled, there continue to be policy instruments that the Department of Agriculture uses to reduce rice import volumes, and that is the sanitary and phytosanitary permit. That's supposed to be used only for human health considerations, but instead is being used to control volumes. The result is that continuing hunger among our population, as gleaned through social weather stations' opinion polls. And finally, what do we need to do then? Well, we need to continue working on trade and supply side reforms to improve competitiveness, continue to dismantle the QRs, institute a low and uniform tariff structure. 35% tariff on rice is very high. Very high. If we bring it down to around 10%, That's still higher than most countries for food items. And in addition, making the tariff structure relatively uniform will achieve much greater gains for the population and the economy as large. Push investments in productivity using the technology that's available to the Filipinos directly from Erie, for example. And next, focus on regulatory instruments that protect human, plant, and animal life and support exports. And finally, enable business, not the bureaucracy, to decide on import levels and trade levels at competitive prices. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bruce Tarantino, for that very thoughtful presentation, looking at the reform, the history and the reforms and the political economy context and the forces that may be behind the next round of changes and how these changes should be. And important changes has to be continue for the rice economy, rice productivity to agricultural productivity to grow, at the same time protecting the consumers, vulnerable groups in a very constructive manner. Now, next we have from Philippines we have to India. We have a distinguished panel from Dr. Ashok Gunati, and I'm going to share your views from India.
Thank you very much. I don't have slides. I think, let me start by thanking David for a very comprehensive, clear, and setting the tone for the entire session. I'm supposed to talk about India. David showed two things very clear. A dramatic increase in India's rice exports. How did that happen? And second, he's also talking about heavy government intervention, perhaps the heaviest government intervention in any market, rice market in the world, in any country. Before I come to these things, let me give you a little background of the size, the structure of the rice system in India. India has the largest area under rice, 46 million hectares. It produces about 135 million tons of rice. Productivity is still about 3 tons, 2.9 tons per hectare. This is the production part of the system. On the consumption side, there is a big issue. India passed in 2013 a National Food Security Act, under which 2/3 of the population would be given highly subsidized rice, wheat, and coarse cereals. In fact, at present, they are being given free. Rice and wheat is being given free to more than 813 million people. 813 million people are getting free rice or wheat, 5 kilograms per person per month. During the COVID period, from April 2020 to December 2022, actually they were getting 10 kilograms per person per month, all free. And our Honorable Prime Minister has already promised, if he comes back to power, and this is the election time right now, then for the next 5 years, this will remain free. Now, if this remains free, It's a subsidy, food subsidy to the tune of about $25–26 billion. So that's one part of the, when you see the whole spectrum from producer to consumer, you are talking about taxing consumers in Philippines. Here is a case where there is huge subsidization of consumers. So in a way, consumer bias in the system. Because the political economy that I talked about the first day, largest number are consumers, and that's where the politics plays in terms of free food. Now, what happens in between in the markets game? I think that is what he was highlighting. So if you have to give free food to the consumers, you have to procure. When you have to procure, you have to give some minimum support price to the farmers. So there is a minimum support price to the farmer, which basically covers their paid out costs, plus imputed value of their family labor, and a margin, 50% margin on top of that. That's the formula under which it operates. And India procures every year about 45 million tons of rice from the market. So out of 135 million, even if you take 70% as the marketed surplus, out of that, 45 million is taken away by the government. Now, if the market price goes up very high and minimum support price is low, then there is a problem for the government. It can't procure. Original idea of minimum support price was that this should be the minimum price, and if the market is giving farmers a better price, then the government should compete and buy at that higher price. But that doesn't happen because that will blow up the subsidy budget for the consumers in the government budget. So what do? If exports are going up, domestic prices are going up, and you have to procure 45 million tons, then you try to put all sorts of restrictions, not complete ban. I'll give you, because 22 million tons we have been exporting. You know, our exports are more than the next three exporters, Thailand, Vietnam, Pakistan. So 22 million tons has been roughly the export of rice in a world market of about 53, 54 million tons. So roughly 40% India is exporting. But then you have to feed your own people too. Even after putting these export restrictions, I was checking the data yesterday. The data is out up to February. We have April to March as the financial year. So the March data is still not out, but up to February, we have already exported 14.5 million tons after all these so-called bans or restrictions. And my feeling is we will cross about 16 million tons. So from 22 to 16. But this 6 million ton reduction in a market of 53, 54 million tons, a 10 to 12% drop, can increase the prices by 20%. So that's where these policies will always be decided in the political economy framework. Why was the export restriction put in place? Before rice, we went in for literally export ban of wheat, and that was because of Ukraine-Russia conflict. Because at that time, the crude prices went up, wheat prices started going up. India was afraid how we will meet our own requirement if we keep on allowing the export. So the first ban was put on this. We had enough stocks of rice, but then our monsoon is the most critical thing because 75% of the water we get in those 4 months, June to September. June, July, August, September. These 4 months are very critical. And David showed us there was El Nino effect. It did not lead to any drought in India, but 3 weeks during the middle of the monsoon, there was a break. And that created a sort of a panic. By how much the production will drop, we don't know. Whether it will go down by 10%, 5%, 15%, that shock, that will. And that led to putting export restrictions in July. We were saying you are still having enough stocks. Even today, what you need as the buffer stock norm, you have 3 to 4 times higher in your kitty. So don't worry on that account. But government was acting in a bit of panic. And then the prices started increasing. Monetary board member would know. The central bank had to control inflation. And when you have to control inflation, and we were finding wheat inflation was hovering at 35%. Rice inflation was at 13%, and these are the basic staples. So what do? First, you put restrictions. Second, they started unloading their own stocks even below the economic cost. Almost, there is a minimum support price, and then there is a procurement cost, stocking cost, distribution cost, that becomes the economic cost. So they started unloading at below the economic cost, which was more or less so that harvest season, what the price was, minimum support price, and even in the off season, the price was brought down to that minimum support price. And that is policy still continuing so that government can procure enough. So there is an issue of producer interest and consumer interest. And I have great sympathy with the political masters who have to balance, because they are walking on a very tight rope. If the prices go up, the consumers are shouting. If the prices go down, then the producers are shouting. And it's a very vocal democracy, noisy. So you can imagine what happens. So in that political framework, this is what had happened. So don't think that India's ban, so-called rice ban, led to zero exports. No. From 22 to 16, 17, the final figure will settle around that. But it's an important. Now, the whole issue, and I'll take 2 minutes on this, is on how much resilience we can bring and how much nutrition we can bring. So at both ends, for the farmer, resilience is needed. India is investing heavily in terms of drought-resistant varieties, flood-resistant varieties on rice. We have had greater success in wheat, where we are talking about 60% plus area of wheat under heat-resistant varieties. But a similar thing is going on rice, and that will be an answer whether we can cope up with El Ninos of tomorrow. So that's very critical, and that's agri R&D, and India is investing heavily in that field. On the consumer end, are we going beyond carbs for the consumers? And yes, in fact, the Prime Minister himself released 35 varieties of zinc-rich rice and wheat, both. And as David was talking about, there's a lot of high stunting amongst children below the age of 5. And if you are not feeding them well, and they are taking rice or wheat as basic staples, and if they are deficient, our soils have become deficient in zinc because of our fertilizer policy, which subsidizes heavily the urea but not the micronutrients. So the staples have become deficient in micronutrients, and that is leading to stunting and further impacting their earning capacity throughout life. So there is a lot that's going on this of fortifying rice, even supplementing rice with some iron-rich rice type of things. But on biofortification, they are going for, already they have released zinc-rich. They have not taken the step that Philippines and Bangladesh have taken of golden rice. So that's something on the cards. Overall, David, for another point that you mentioned, will India or other countries will diversifying away from rice? We are trying. In fact, I should highlight the problem of rice in India, one point. In the erstwhile Green Revolution belt, Punjab and Haryana, which Punjab contributes the maximum to the central pool in the procurement business, but that rice, 100% is literally groundwater irrigated. And the groundwater table has been going down in that region. And that is becoming a major challenge because they are giving free power to the farmers, and that is leading to depletion of water. And that free power plus subsidies on fertilizers makes rice as the most remunerative crop there, and therefore. So in Haryana, some experiments have started. If you're not growing rice, if you shift from paddy to pulses or oilseeds or some other crops which are not as water intensive, then you will get X amount of cash on per hectare basis. That's the policy. Even perhaps we are talking with the government for Punjab. The new deal has to be given to them, otherwise they are impacting the natural resource base of the country. That effort is going on, but Eastern India, Southern India, I think rice productivity has been low and that productivity has been going up. For the next 5, 7, 10 years, I don't see rice being substituted by other crops in any big way, but maybe after 8, 10 years, when the consumption patterns also get away. And the biggest change, if it can come, in the consumer basket, instead of giving wheat and rice, if you give them cash, so that there is a diversification of the consumption basket, so income transfer, and that's the last word, because both on fertilizer and food subsidy, India is spending about 4 trillion rupees, that's about $50 billion on this, $45–50 billion. If both these are done, what Mark Rosegrant was saying, repurpose and give it through cash transfers to the beneficiaries, then you can easily save 25 to 30%, and that was the number that you are looking. And if that is plowed back into agriculture, then this question of resilience for the farmers and nutrition for the consumers can be achieved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ashok Gulati, for that. Help us to understand better how the Indian policy making in the food policy making addressing both that dilemma of meeting on the consumer side and also meeting the political and interest on the producer side. So and then or end up with the important point which resonates with what Dr. Torrentino noted earlier, on the productivity, how to increase productivity in terms of resilience, and then how to address the challenge, the nutrition on the consumption side. What are the repurposing the subsidies for the in the interest of healthy and population. Now, thank you very much once again, and thank you also for addressing the questions, some of the questions raised by David. Let us now invite former Minister Farr and Dr. Farr to give us his view. He's sharing our insights on the Vietnam rice policy and his current role as the chair of IRRI Board of Trustees. Dr. Farr, please.
I am very grateful to ADB for organizing this forum and this section. I wish to have it more frequent. Reason is, I was directly involved in dealing with rice crisis, rice market crisis in 2008 as minister, and last year, nearly crisis. And what I learned is we are going to have such kind of shock because of El Nino, La Nina, and we are going to have it not locally but globally. But consequences were more than impact of a natural problem. Consequences were amplified because of policy action. And policy action from such big player, exporter, importer, amplified our problem. And partly because we did have enough information. We had misinformation. And that's why sometimes different governments took not really right action. Last year, we tried to coordinate, to share information. It was helpful. I text to Dr. Liu Sebastian, who was in charge of rice in Philippines. Whenever he asked, what are prices in Vietnam? What is harvest? I told him. And I told him that we are advising our government not to put any restriction. Vietnam is not going to restrict, to make him sure that he has the source of market supply of rice to Philippines. I think it was helpful. I wish to have such forum, open forum for our region, even if better to have such forum for whole world. It would have not only importing countries, but also exporting countries. In Vietnam, we are under huge pressure to put on the restriction. But we have to have evidences to advise the government. Don't worry, follow right policies. So I will try to give you true information today about Vietnam and about ERI. But you asked me to do 2 rounds, so maybe 20 minutes instead of 10. But I will limit to only 10. So first about Vietnam. We have 100 million people, every year 1 more million. We have 4 million of rice land. And before 1990, we were in short of food. I feel so, how was bad. So that's why in 1986, Vietnam decided to carry out market-oriented reform. Main components were land reform, introduction of the free market mechanism, as Professor David Dow said, that almost no distortion. A little bit credit, to trader to buy, but very small. We restructure public services, research, extension, cooperative, state farm, promote private businesses. We invest heavily in irrigation and rural development and rural infrastructure. Nowadays, more than 90% of rice land in Vietnam irrigated. And now, outcome. Agriculture has been growing 3% for nearly 4 decades. And we have food security, export of agricultural produces has been growing very fast. Last year we exported $53 billion. And farmer income grew 16 times. Forest coverage increased from 27 to 42%. Rice production between 85 and 2015, 30 years has been growing 3.5% a year. But for last 10 years, we took another policy. We want to have farmers to have higher income. But rice farmers are poor. They are poorest farmers. That's why we have them to diversify. And rice production started to decrease, annually 5%. So, but the yield still continue to grow, 2.1% a year, while acreage declining. You can see that the peak was 7.8, now 7.1 million hectare. That you can see the 4 million hectare of land, but 7.8 million hectare of crop pit. It means that we do double cropping. And export continues to grow because we consume less. When I was child, I ate 200 kilograms a year. Now maybe 60. Main challenges: low efficiency of agriculture and rice sector, low farmers' income, pollution, emission, vulnerability to the climate change. That we have to deal with these challenges. And that's why we put goal of the rice sector, high growth, not quantity. High growth of value added for farmers, and sustainable and low emission. Because we have to carry out our commitment. And what we sorry, I stopped responding to me. Oh, I am pushing back.
Just stick it here.
And we see new incentive for dealing with those challenges in one, continued policy reform. Second, science technology. Third, infrastructure. Fourth, human resource development and better governance. But I see not only in Vietnam, but in Asia, we have common important rice research issues. One is improvement of rice nutrition and value. Second, increase efficiency of rice farming. And third, improve resilience and sustainability of rice farming. Actually, rice value chain. That's why ERI, as a leading Research Institute, Global Institute, we've been working on 4 research flagships: nutrition, direct seeded rice, climate resilient farming, dissemination, and education. So with nutrition, we found genes that make rice low glycemic and ultra low glycemic. That brilliant idea when I came to Erie, I found it. Because all over Asia now, we are having more and more middle income and high income people. And all of them are afraid of diabetes. I love rice, but I eat only that little every day because I am afraid of diabetes. Many of you too. That's why low GI is solution. And as consumer, I am happy, but I am more happy for my farmers because initial research shows that low GI rice price can be $1,800 a ton, when normal one only $600 a ton. That's a great opportunity. But when we are going to produce more, maybe lower, but still it's high. And we also mainstream it. Zinc, it means that now on, all rice varieties came out from Erie will be with high zinc. But for my farmers, with more money. So last year, Dr. Isaac Coakley presented one low GI to President of Philippines for testing. And direct seeded. So all over Asia, we used to do replanting, very high cost, high labor, I mean. Now labor cost is increasing. We have to do it direct seeded. But we do it not only in the way to save labor, but also to be resilient, to be efficient. And besides that, we also select salinity tolerant, drought tolerant, and flooding tolerant rice varieties. And so we have created a consortium for direct seeded rice and cooperate with NARES to do it. We are working a lot on climate resilient farming. I can inform you that a package for low emission, high quality rice tested widely and now ready for implementation. And MRV system as well. That's why last week, Jana and we kick off in Vietnam a program of so-called sustainable development of 1 million hectares of high quality and low emission rice in the Mekong Delta using these packages. But having good technical package is not enough, because why consumer have to pay more for public good for the same price? Low emission is not in the rice. You have the same rice. So that's why we are working on the market side, on demand side, how to give incentive for everyone to work on. And we have evidences show that we can reduce 65% of emission from rice farming if applied our packages. And then, of course, we continue to carry out this education and training for Asia, Africa, and we are proud that we invented online platform for training and also self-paced courses. It would be very helpful if we fully committed to continue to make contribution to development of rice sector in the region and globally. And to question of Professor David Dow that are we going to diversify? I can inform you that Vietnam is going to diversify rice sector. We are converting land to other purposes. That's why Vietnam will have less rice, but higher quality, and lower emission. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Fa, for that very informative sharing. As the former policymaker, and of course as a very active policy advisor to the government, and how a major exporting country and of rice and should do to keep the clarity of the market, the active engagement for Vietnam in the market, make sure that the market does not create unnecessary instability. And so thank you also, and thank you also for highlighting the importance of frequent dialogue. So this is the part of that process. We hope that, as you have advised, that we have this more of such a dialogue in the region and with in a global forum. And may I now invite Professor Ora to share with us the Thailand policy perspective. Professor Ora, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. David Doe, for highlighting very important information and also raised key questions for our region to respond. And I had a chance to see his question before I prepared my own presentation. So I hope I could respond to some of his questions. And to be honest, I'm not very much engaged with the rice sector as much as my senior panelists here, who also have very, very good policy influence to the government. But I'm just providing information from academic perspective, and I hope that this is the current situation in Thailand that I could share with you. Okay. Because Dr. David Doe highlighted some of the key questions that we commonly share in our region, so I want to also highlight that Thailand shares some of the same challenges. The first one is the climate change, and the other is the changing in consumer demand of the preference and lower per capita consumption in some of the countries, including Thailand. The other thing that Thailand also faces is emerging competitors. Some of the markets, segmented of the markets, we didn't have competitors before. For example, fragrant or aromatic rice. In the past several years, we have emerging competitors from Vietnam and Cambodia, where we didn't have before. Some of the pain points or the weaknesses of the Thai rice sector. First, the rice farmers themselves. We face very big problem of aging farmers. And not just farmers, Thai population in general is entering aging society. The other is that farmers, particularly rice farmers, are poor. And not only that, they don't have good access to the market or other information necessary for their own production and management. A lot of farmers are also in debt, and they have very little coordination or group formation, so they have very little negotiation power. The production itself, Thailand is one of the lowest productivity in terms of rice production in the region, believe it or not, although we are the major rice exporter. And the cost of production is increasing due to high land rent and also labor costs. The wage rate is also increasing. We have a lot of labor from immigrant workers, thanks to our neighbors, but nevertheless, the cost of labor is also increasing. The cost of machinery is also rising because of the rising fuel oil price and some other reasons. We also have risk from natural disaster, flooding, drought, sharing similar problems with our neighboring countries. And the price, like Dr. David Daw already highlighted, that the market is thin and then we have high price volatility. The types and quantity of rice in Thailand also does not match well with the market demand, which I would discuss a little bit more in the next few slides. We do export a lot of rice, but some of the rice we could not even compete. For example, we have white rice, but it doesn't identify whether it's hard kind of rice or it's soft rice. So we cannot even compete with this, perhaps the largest portion of the export market, which is the probably best exported from Vietnam. The other is that Thailand has very good rice production, but we don't have good enough of the technology to improve the value of the rice. So we are now gearing towards improving the value of rice, not just the breeding program itself, but also trying to improve the processed product quality. These are all identified by the government, by the way, not by myself. So when they analyze Thai industry, this is what they have found. So the other very big problem is the rice supply chain in Thailand is not very well managed from Thai perspective. Last is the investment in research and development. We have also limited scientists who are specialized in certain area, for example, biotechnology, mechanization. And some of the breeding programs are very, very slow and heavily invested by the public sector, not enough by the private sector, unlike Vietnam, for example. So maybe I would give you a little bit of background about Thai rice production. These figures show okay, sorry. Okay, so this left panel is the area of rice production. In the wet season, we have two main seasons, wet and dry season. So the green areas on your left panel is the production area in Thailand. And the middle one is the area production that are irrigated. So you can see that most of the areas are non-irrigated, especially in the northeast of Thailand. So if you look at the far right diagram, you will see a lot of unsuitable area for rice production, particularly in the northeast and the south. Okay, so the only irrigated area in the central region is probably more suitable for rice production. And not only that, create some of the issues of water management. In this case, is the effects of flood on Thai rice production in 2 years, 2011 and 2015. And you already see that many of the areas, particularly in the northeast, were affected by rice production. And northeast is the main area of rice production in Thailand. This one is the effects of climate change on rice production. And the left panel is the baseline production from 1992 to 2016, and this is the baseline. And if you look at the next two panels, you will see a decline in rice production based upon the projection of RCP, which is representative concentration pathway, or in other words, it's the temperature that rises and affects the rice cultivation. And it was expected that rice production in Thailand would decrease by 10 to 13% roughly, and that would affect rice export. That we hope not to happen, but it would affect also the rice export that would decrease by about 7%. This one was a study by Yuan et al., and including Alice here in our room, who is part of the team. And this study actually want to highlight that the rice yield in this region, in Southeast Asia, is far below its potential. Thailand is also included. So if you see these figures, you would see that the yield gap in darker orange or red areas are the ones that have higher yield gaps, and the one in the green, Indonesia, for example, have lower yield gaps. So Thailand is one of the countries that have very, very high yield gaps to its potential. And if you look at the bars on your right, that would show that if you can minimize this gap, then you can improve the kind of supply needed for the whole region. So this study actually highlighted there could be more investment in agriculture policy, and also including innovation and research and development to improve this yield gap, and that would secure more rice self-sufficiency in our region. Okay, so David raised a question about rice or diversification of production to improve, first of all, income of the farmers and maybe also improve nutrition. I want to mention the majority of Thai farmers are monocropping. They don't diversify. In very small area, they might diversify with some of the few crops like pineapple, or larger crop like rubber, but that's very, very low for upland rice. We don't have diversification like Vietnam. When you have rice, fish farming, we don't have, almost none of the areas that way. So diversification for nutrition might be one of the aspects that Thailand can respond to. We have very many, quite several types of rice, and these already become formal standards. We have one of the standards that maybe other countries might not have, is the color rice standard. It became into effect in 2017 in Thailand, and also 2019 for export markets. We have basically black or a purple rice standard, and also red rice standards. Referring to also healthy rice, we have low GI rice as well, as similar to Vietnam, but the market is very small, and it's not. It was once promoted heavily to improve farmers' incomes, similar strategy that Vietnam is doing, and it's highly responded by the farmers. But recently, I think the area production is not as big as before, and many people just eat brown rice to reduce their diabetes kind of problems. We also have standards, and these are not standards formally passed by the government, except for, say, organic, that we have Thai organic standard. We have just adopting SRP standard. I'm not sure if Win is in this room. And also we have geographical indication, particularly for rice standard as well. So I would next talk about Thai rice policy, and this one particularly show the long-term rice action plan of the Ministry of Agriculture and Cooperatives. The first one is to establish the rice restructuring program that will be consistent with rice zoning. So basically just improve the area that are suitable for rice farming, and then trying to minimize the area production that are not suitable to other crops. But I don't think this program is much successful. Second one is the large field program. This particular program is trying to improve farmer productivity by achieving economy of scale. They're trying to get farmers together as a bigger group, and so that they have larger negotiation power, and also improving the access to particular markets. On your right side, there are two others programs. One is to establish seed centers, and the other is to establish community rice seed banks. So seed is one of the problems that the sector has, is that we don't have sufficient certified seed provided by the government. This one is rice production development policy under the Ministry of Agriculture and Cooperatives as well. There are quite a few strategies set up by the government. First is that Thai rice should be produced to serve the market. And personally, I don't think Thailand knows enough about changing or dynamic of the markets. We are very good in export markets, but the market itself changed rapidly. And I don't think there is enough study of knowing what the market needs right now. The other is to adopt modern technology, particularly precision agriculture, using Thailand or Agriculture 4.0 policy. Next one is to make sure that our rice is safe, is secure for our people, and also ensure that the farming is sustainable. The fourth one is what we call integrated model of proactive management, basically trying to make farmers becoming more entrepreneur, and then they would be updated to modern agriculture or e-commerce. Last is the late King philosophy of sufficient agriculture. So we still keep this in Thai people's mind and trying to follow the late King philosophy of sustainable agriculture. In terms of production development, there are several programs which I don't think I have time to go through this, but basically just to promote, what we have strategy on the left panel. So at the moment, Thailand has what we call Thai rice strategies. It ends this year, 2024. We call market-driven production. The vision is that Thailand is the world's leader in production and marketing of high-quality rice and rice product, not just rice, but also rice product. High quality, this implies that not just good taste that the markets prefer, but also safe and also ensure that it's environmental friendly. So there are four major missions. One is that we really need to understand the export markets, so we have to improve ourselves in understanding the dynamic of the trade issues. And we want to make sure that Thai rice is preferred and consumers are confident about our quality and standards. Second one I think is very, very important is the domestic market. Not only that we focus on the export market, but we have to ensure that our Thai people have a good rice quality in the domestic market. Third is the production. I think this one is probably the biggest challenge in our Thai rice industry. We have to strengthen farmers' more of the efficiency and also make sure that they learn to adapt to changing environment. So this one, we want to ensure that farmers are self-reliant, have well-being, and more efficient in the managing side. And not only that, we also aim to improve the research and development of not just the variety, but the whole value chain. And the last one may be very important for the processed product. We want to improve not just rice, but also rice product quality and processed product as well. Okay, so just to summarize, market-led production rice strategy, which will end this year. The policy focuses on three main things. One is strengthening farmers and farmers' organization to be self-reliant and have well-being and enough income. Second is to increase efficiency of rice production, particularly on management and competitiveness, that we can compete still with our competitors. Last is to invest more in research and development. Okay. I want to summarize the current measures due to changing in the government. Some of the policy that David Daw also mentioned earlier about, say, minimum price or income guarantee program, these no longer exist under the current administration. We focus more on crop insurance to deal with the natural disaster, but those four ones that I listed on top are still ongoing measures. These measures have been continued for the last administrations and continue with this current administration. First is the credit support program to stabilize price by stocking, so delay the sales. The government would also help farmers under this program to stabilize the price. Basically, they would keep rice after harvest, not just selling immediately. Second is the interest compensation for stocking, and that was targeted for 10 million tons to support partly of the interest that farmers have to pay. The next one is the credit support program. This is to help farmers improve their efficiency and also add value to their production. This would be supported heavily to the farmers group more than individual farmers. Last is the rice production management and quality improvement. Again, this is also the support program to help farmers reduce the cost by, say, for example, help the harvest cost, kind of subsidy to the harvest cost. And speaking of the trade, for export, we don't have any barriers, no restriction on quality, quantity, or there's no tariff. For imports, we have even tax higher than the Philippines. This tariff rate quota is 30% under the quota, and it jumps to 52% above the quota. Okay, I have a few more slides, but it will be quick because I want to just say that we don't invest enough in research and development and technology. And so you can see that the share of rice investment relative to GDP is declining over years. Maybe in the past just few years, it just picked up, but compared to several decades ago, you will see it declined. And not only the investment in R&D, if you look at the researchers, that is not just rice sector, but agriculture overall. You will see the majority of researchers are in the government or university. Very little, almost doesn't exist in this picture, show you that it's invested by private sector. Next, please. Okay, so under this current program, we want to improve the quality. The main thing we want to do is to release new varieties that serve the demand, particularly exports. We aim for soft variety rice, hard variety rice, fragrant rice, and also high nutrition rice. So they aim for few of the varieties that should be released, and after 3 years, more varieties were developed under this kind of campaign. And I think maybe this is my last slide. I want to say that the government alone cannot accomplish huge challenges. There are several programs ongoing in Thailand, including ones that are supported by the German government to help with low-emission rice. Second is the Sustainable Rice Platform. This is also multi-sector, not just public-private, including farmers and others. Thailand also already approved the standards of SRP. And last one, just give you a simple example of the breeding program that also supported by other initiatives, including Newton Rice Research. I think that would be the end. I want to show this particular picture. This is the farm at our university at different campus, at Kamphaeng Sang campus. And this is the development of what we call rainbow rice. So we're not aiming to develop rice for the grade alone, but now it's developing towards other quality, including leaves and what you call stems, so that it became different kind of products, not just grain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ora, for that very informative sharing of how Thailand, as a non-standing exporting rice exporter, is finding its ways to moving forward. So in many areas, especially improving farm productivity, research in particular, and then bring in high value added. So sorry that I rushed you, and so, we are actually over time, and already 5 minutes over time. If I could ask for your patience, and maybe we have a few more minutes, I'd like to invite our the audience, and if you have any questions to our panel members, and also to David, and he's still online. I'd like to invite one or two questions, and to hear the panel feedback. So, questions? Please be brief with, and just questions, no commentaries. Is it working? Maybe you can just shout. Speak loud. Yeah, speak loud.
Okay. First of all, I would like to compliment.
Can someone help to?
Actually, food security is a vast area, and it depends on affordability, accessibility, utility, and stability. And it has a range of challenges like climate change, food loss, waste, land degradation, and water resources, and something like that. And you know that there are many
questions.
agencies. Okay.
Question.
I'm coming to questions.
Yes.
There are many agencies are working on different areas, like UNFCCC on climate change, UNCCD on land degradation, and UN CBD on biodiversity loss. And we are also talking many areas in this program. And I think that we should focus on a particular area so that we can achieve more. And I think food consumption.
What is the question?
Consumption pattern must be changed, and food loss and waste should be minimized. What maybe the best strategy to minimize the food loss or food waste, as well as to shift the food consumption pattern. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. You didn't ask a question, just a commentary. So let's move to the one with questions. Any questions? Yes, please.
My question is for Thailand. Can you share us your experience how the mechanism for the support of government in supporting farmers to delay selling their produce so that they can be protected from lower price?
Thank you. Let us take one more question. Yes, a question, no commentary, madam.
Yes. I have a very practical question, like most women in Asia.
Fantastic.
What is the role of imports? Is it good for our farmers? Because for women, it is not so good. Our farmers' produce are being wasted, while the government and the private sector go to imports. So that is only my question. Also, I'd like to question on mechanization. Okay. Is it needed? Does it increase the income of farmers? Who give the mechanization landscape? That is my question.
Thank you very much. So we have a question for Thailand, and we have questions. The questions about the imports and the questions about the mechanization. That's for the end. So maybe we can ask Dr. Bruce Torrentino and Dr. Ashok, maybe, and Professor Fa, Minister Fa to give just very brief feedback. First with Thailand.
For a rice delay program, the government would ask farmers if they can keep rice after harvest. In some of the areas, for example, when they can only grow one crop a year in the Northeast, many farmers might have silo at their house because these are very small holding farmers. In some larger area, like irrigated areas, most of the farmers use combined harvester, and after harvest, they directly sell to the millers or to the central markets. But in some other areas, particularly in the Northeast, where you have more or less the production for household consumption as well, then farmers can keep some of the rice at their silo, that kind of delaying their harvest to sell into the market. And by keeping this stock at home, the government would pay them to stock the rice.
Okay. Thank you. For the other question, yes, please. Yes, please.
On the question of imports, many political leaders often, say we have to have self-sufficiency. Now, self-sufficiency in everything is very good in talking. At the end of the round, if every country has its own self-sufficiency, there will be no trade. Issue is which countries have comparative advantage in doing one commodity or the other, and then exchange. Yes, agriculture is a little more sensitive than many other commodities because it's a basic staple, and therefore what level of self-sufficiency you want to attain, depending upon how much foreign exchange you have and how global markets are. But self-sufficiency at 7 times the price of the global market. Japan or Philippines, you are saying your prices are very high. Indian prices are the lowest globally. So it's a question of where do you draw the line for your own farmers and then tax the consumers. You want to give higher price to the farmer and tax the consumers, or you want to give low price to the consumers and low price to the farmers. That's the Indian story. So trade, one extreme is keep it open on both sides, import and export. The other is filter it with comparative advantage and how sensitive that particular commodity is for the masses. That's the way to go. On the farm mechanization, over a period of time, the labor has to be replaced by farm mechanization. There is no doubt about it. The problem that comes in smallholder economies is that everybody cannot own a machine because holding size is too small. But the farm services, machinery services, if you can play like the Uberization, Uber for your taxi, why not Uber for your tractor? So if you can devise that type of a digital platform and that type of service, you charge a service, the tractor will come, harvest your thing, or plow your field, do whatever you like. So that's the way to go ahead, and that's likely happening in most of the countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other feedback? No? Okay. Let me say that thank you all very much, and thanks panel members and for this excellent presentation. And this will lead into the next segment at 11, talking about the more specific mechanisms in ASEAN Plus 3 setting. We have heard from the panels to give us that overview. The policies are changing, the countries' policies are changing, the rice industries globally and regionally are changing. So how in this changing context, how this ASEAN Plus 3 mechanism should also adjust and update itself. So thank you very much, our panel members, and thank you and for this wonderful presentation.